Welcome back to the second PowerPoint on Islam practices and beliefs. And I wanted to start by saying that this is very intentional, that Islam focuses a whole lot more on the practice of the religion than adherence to a belief. To be a Muslim is to practice a certain life and to live in a certain way. So we're going to start with the practices then. So worship itself, we speak of the mosque, but probably a more accurate term is the masjid. So the house of worship. Um, they do worship weekly, as do the Jews and the Christians, and their main congregational worship is Friday at 12 noon. And so this is difficult in many Western societies. Many Muslims in America or in Europe will take their lunch break in order to go to uh, the mosque or the masjid. So this is the one in. Uh, this is not actually. I'm kind of misleading you with these images. Uh, that's the Al Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, but that's the Hagia Sophia, which what began as the Christian cathedral of Istanbul, and then they've added the minarets. So before also we go into the practices, we've talked a little bit about the lunar calendar that Judaism works with. Judaism is a modified lunar calendar, so things stay within the same season. But there are no leap years in or anything in the Islamic calendar, so it gets kind of funky when comparing it to our calendar, the Gregorian calendar. So various holidays like Ramadan will literally, well, first start say there it is a 12-month calendar, but it's about 11 days shorter. So basically, every holiday like Ramadan, the months will move forward about 11 or 12 days every year and eventually work their way all around. So again, to use the example of Ramadan, can be in August, it can be in May. Also, uh, remind you that like the Jewish tradition as well, the day begins at sunset instead of midnight. So, just sort of the basics. Now, all Muslims, this is what it means to be Muslim. It is to practice the five pillars, known as the straight path, as in easily followed. Now, I used the terminology of pillars with Judaism. That was sort of unofficial. This is official. So you need to know them as pillars, the five pillars, and to know them. This is the basic practice of Islam. Everything else is sort of built on top of this. So, the pillars. So the first is the Shahada, one sentence. So this, how do you convert to Islam, for example? You speak with faith the Shahada. So you want to be a Muslim, you go, I would assume, before the community, and there is no God but Allah, la ilaha illa Allah, and then Muhammad is his prophet. So this is the basic statement of faith as well. They're not big on creeds. So to utter this in faith makes you a Muslim. Second pillar, canonical prayer. So canonical, I use that term in the sense of preset, right? You don't just sit down and pray what's in your heart. There's a set of prayers that each Muslim will recite during those times. There's time for personal prayer as well, but along with these preset prayers, 5 times a day, all men will pray together. This so if you're in an Islamic uh, region, the times of the prayer are often um, marked from the mosque. So there will be a bell, a something, uh, and in some cases, the prayers themselves will be read out by the imam, the leader of the service, from those towers, those minarets that you often see nowadays. If you go to an Islamic country, you will see that those towers or minarets have speakers on them, and it blasts it out to the town. So 5 times a day, one of those is in the middle of the night. If you ever travel to a traditional Islamic country, bring your earplugs. It'll wake you up in the middle of the night. So, preset prayers that everyone prays. So here again, an image, and it's anywhere, and you try as much as you can to face Mecca when you do this. So here it is in a mosque. The mosques are set up to always face Mecca. When I was in Egypt, we were on a boat, and it was time for the prayers, and the men rolled out their rugs and got down on their hands and knees. And I also like this picture because there were clearly, this is a guy running a t-shirt stand in New York City, but he is a faithful Muslim, and so he gets down on his knees and prays in what one would assume the direction of Mecca. And so this is very much an understanding of one's entire day is full of prayer, and one stays oriented towards God. And again, it doesn't, if you are, if you know each other, you don't know each other, you will still get down at these same times every day and pray together. So that all of Islam is sort of, there's this rolling prayers to Islam as the day goes through every day. So that is the second pillar. So again, this is what is obligatory of all Muslims. Now this is really fascinating to me. The pillar number 3, charity or zakat. One is required to give 2.5% of your wealth away every year. So, and before we get to the acceptable recipients, which are there, this is when one says wealth, it's 2.5% or 1/40th, by the way, of one's wealth has to be donated to charity every year. That is everything. So you can go up on the website and go look for a zakat. You can go up on the internet and look for a zakat calculator, and it has to be your bank accounts, any land that you own, the wealth of that land, any gold or jewelry that you might have, any stocks or investments, and it has to be counted. So it's not just 10% of your salary. It's 2.5% of everything that you own above a certain amount. So I looked it up. This year, the baseline, you can take all of your wealth, subtract about just under $5,000 from it, and the rest, 2.5% of what's left, has to be given to charity if you are a devout Muslim. So this is a huge transfer of money every year for among the faithful. So that's you subtract that number, and again, I should say that's the number I found. Different schools of thought will calculate that number differently, and get to your 2.5% differently. But it's a very it's not casual by any stretch of the imagination. It's not, okay, today I kind of made this much money, so I'm going to give this much to the church. No, this is calculated. So there are a lot of institutions then within Islam that are set up to administer this money. But the Quran itself, so this means it's fundamental to all Islamic thought. So that goes to persons in immediate need. Of course, this is a different era, although slavery doesn't seem to have died out. But back in, you could use it to buy a slave for their freedom. If one was in debt, you could help a person who is burdened by their debt. Strangers and wayfarers. Now, remember, there are two things that I wanted. This is an ancient nomadic culture, right? So a lot of people were very much on the move, but we haven't gotten to the next pillar. But the idea of pilgrimage, as the idea of pilgrimage to Mecca became more and more popular and required, actually, one assumes that many of these strangers and wayfarers were on their way. So to pilgrimage, so it was, and in a day without airplanes or cars or trains or whatever, a pilgrimage to Mecca could be quite extensive. So very much you are supporting your fellow believers. And then also, I really like this one, those who collect and distribute the donations. So part of one's charity is to support those who actively then administer the charities. When my husband and I were in Jordan about 15 years ago with Habitat for Humanity, and we helped at least in one stage of the building of a home in a town in the northern part of Jordan. What I found there is that many, many traditional Arabic towns have a charitable association, and the leader of the charitable association is basically equivalent to the mayor of the city in terms of power. So they have a mayor, but they also have these leaders of the charitable societies, and each town will have its own. This would be one of the places that that would receive some of this money, and these charitable societies did a lot of what charitable organizations do: playgrounds, schools, taking care of the poverty and all of that, so that some of this stuff stays in the town. So pillar number 3. Pillar number 4 then is Ramadan. So Ramadan, so the practice, let's start with that, is a fast from dawn to dusk for an entire month. So, but you are allowed to eat when it's dark. So it is a really interesting time of both self-denial, but also of community and socialization. So you fast during the day, but then, as you can see, here's a picture of a Ramadan, the lights of a Ramadan celebration. At night, when the sun is set, you'd be with your family, you would have these meals, and so it's very much a communal celebration as well. So, and I would also say then, here's an interesting element that I never really thought about when it comes to Ramadan, that it's a much easier to celebrate Ramadan when it's in January, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, than if it's in August. And so this is one of the issues, that Muslims face. So what does it celebrate? It celebrates the revelation of the Quran and the conquering or the move back to Mecca. It is, of course, all about self-discipline and reflection. And I loved this quote: "Only those who have gone hungry can understand what hunger is." So it's an attempt to associate again also with the needs of your society. I would say also, as a reminder, that there are all sorts of exceptions. So, for example, the elderly if you're sick, if you're pregnant, life is more important than the practice of Ramadan. So if you are in these categories, it's not a blanket of requirement for everyone. Ramadan is you could not risk your. It's not do not risk your life over it. So if you have an exception. So Ramadan. Um, oop, and then pillar number 5, which is the pilgrimage, which I've mentioned briefly already. So here's an aerial site of the Kaaba. Um, the pilgrimage to Mecca is required of all who are physically and economically capable of making the trip. So this is very much was in the ancient world, when in the 700s, 800s, 900s, throughout what we would think of as the Middle Ages, this was a very extensive, difficult trip, and could take a year for you to be able to get there and get back. So it took a lot of dedication. So physically and economically capable, you have to do it once in your life. So it has to happen one time at least. Now, I do want to kind of skipping around on this. It has to. It is only considered, and by the way, the term for this is Hajj. It is only the Hajj if it takes place during the last month of the Islamic calendar. If you show up during any other month, it's still considered an important pilgrimage, but it's called the Umrah, and it does not count as the pillar number 5. So one of the reports I'd heard with the coronavirus is that, of course, they had to stop all pilgrims from entering this, because if you can see, those are all people. So they have suspended the Umrah right now for health reasons. So it must take place during the last month of the year, and of course, showing one's commitment. There are basically almost a week full of activities that one does. Circling and the Kaaba is only one of those. There's a local well. Some people will even go up all the way into Medina to make a pilgrimage as part of it, but it's very set, and with multiple stages and stops and prayers and activities over a period of several days. But when you enter particularly this part of the city of Mecca, you must take off your own clothes. You are given 2 white sheets. So you'll notice then when you see images of this that everyone will be wearing white, and that's why you're not allowed to wear your own clothes into it. And so, of course, this idea of equalizing, Islam has stayed more unified in some ways than Christianity, and some things like the canonical prayer, these 5 pillars, and then the pilgrimage to Mecca, where you stand next to everyone else. You're all equal before God and in the moment of this particular ceremony. The pilgrimage. Now, Mecca and Medina, by the way, so Mecca and Medina, both cities, are in Saudi Arabia. So the nation of Saudi Arabia plays a very unique role in the larger faith of Islam. You and I could buy a ticket and we could fly to Saudi Arabia if we wanted. I'm not exactly sure what kind of visa you would need, but no one who is not practicing Islam is allowed into the holy territory. So if you could go to Saudi Arabia, you could go around and look at various places, but you would need a separate visa to actually go into this region of Saudi Arabia, and they're very intense about this. So clearly, if you have an Islamic name, they're probably not going to check on you. But if you and I showed up with a European non-Islamic name, we would actually need to show up with a voucher from our imam saying that we had indeed converted to Islam before we would be allowed in. There have been 1 or 2 people who have tried and have succeeded to get into this region through subterfuge, which is probably not very cool in this case. But that's why you'll notice that we have very few pictures of Mecca, and we definitely have only these aerial shots of the main religious sites, because no one is really allowed in there except as a worshiper. And of course, that would mean only Muslims. So let's stop there for a second.